Say you wanted to tell a story to a group of people. Well, the best way to do that would be to think and use words, but besides that, you need a medium to tell the tale. And for many years, the process of storytelling was one-sided. It didn't give a shit about what the audience thought. Imagine you're reading Moby Dick, right? But you can dictate what happens. It's unheard of. You don't do that. This isn't Moby Games we're talking about. This is Moby Dick. But now, it's 1974, and someone comes to you with a story, and you're excited, you're interested, and then they break out the table. Out comes the odd-sided dice and paper, and you start wondering if you had a good life in the end. But wait, it's not the local lunatic, it's the new game, Dungeons and Dragons, and instead of just sitting and listening, you are now part of the story. And then cut now to 50 years later, and we have a larger emphasis on large ass and other well-defined character aspects in the genre. If you were anything like me, sucks to be you, but you'd also really enjoy the RPG. I'm such a fan of playing and discussing them that I wanted to visualize the entire transformation of the genre to see how we got from the table to stable income as one of the most popular subsections of video games. Oh yeah, by the by, there's about 4,000 games here, so some details won't be included, or I won't know them, or I don't care about them, or I didn't think they were interesting, or we'll get to them later, or the video is just made by one ape-like, Chad-like man, so cut him a break, turn down the criticism, accept the swearing, and just enjoy the fucking video. So, 1974, you've got Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and those are the guys who really kind of sort of began the modern role-playing game. Without them, the table would be used for dinner, and the computer would be used to email grandma, and not to stab the kobolds. So after Gary Guy, another guy would come and create the first widespread table RPG, someone was bound to come and steal the concept. And who better than a secondary Gary who'd come into the fray and deliver the first reasonably known computerized RPG, D&D. Didn't even change the fucking title, these Garys nowadays. D&D was made for Plato computers, whatever the shit that is, and it features orange graphics. This is the role-playing game, broken down to its most basic digital forms, a far cry from the grand shit we've seen today, what with the big orchestra and the big voice acting, and the big breasts. It all began with a little man and goblin. You find all sorts of evolution in everything. It's part of nature, nothing stays finite. Look at my ass, it keeps growing, so there was no way that the RPG, one of the cornerstones of fantasy gaming, otherwise known as being in the basement, would not become grander and more fleshed out. And as a connoisseur of all things basement, I feel that I can break this down adequately. Just gonna take 5,000 JPEGs is all. So, D&D is here, let's look at it. The first big step, where the RPG introduces character statistics, equipment, and technically a world map, but this will become less orange in the future. Not only this, but there's a rudimentary story and even non-linear progression. And funnily, the genre, as well as essentially the entire video game industry, would be introduced to the concept of bosses. So thanks Gary and Guy, we have our starting point. For now, characters are self-inserted man, the story is dragon and dungeon help, and the world box is a map. Reverse the words. Let's format this stuff like a stat sheet. There's some good alliteration. Me smart, me right sheet. Gotta put in graphics, a lot of little bit for mechanics, can't forget the skills, no story without a plot and setting. Let's look at the party setup, I'll throw music in for fun even though that doesn't exist yet, and finally let's gander at this interface. Well, it's pretty bleak at this time, I mean for the most part graphics don't exist, mechanics primitive, well skills are there actually, fine we got skills, plot is trivial, party non-existent, music a dream, and the interface is on par with something like a digital abacus. For our character sheet, I'll be adding to our scores 1 point each time they're expanded upon, so if somebody made a new story concept, or in this case any story concept at all, story will get 1 point of growth. When an RPG innovated and created a brand new concept that is strange and feels distinct from these broad subjects, I'll add it to this list over here. Now, from this point forward, the RPG was two things. Firstly, awful, and secondly, incredible. For a while, this genre was pretty much found on computers, and since few people would own personal computers in this time frame, we wouldn't see mass exposure to wizards and warriors and wonder and whimsy and whatnot, but a few places along the way are important to the story at large, such as Petit 5, because it's probably the worst name ever chosen for anything. There's minor development that occurs with the newly founded party notion in Dungeon and Moria, allowing for more than one character per game. In 1978, the first RPG designed to be used on home computers released, known as Beneath Apple Manor, okay that's a title, which introduces a new keyword to the genre, procedural generation. Tasked with reaching a golden apple, the game was improved by introducing randomness. Minor mention of an important game that's not expressly an RPG, but Mud 1, or Multi-User Dungeon, was the earliest attempt at multiplayer gameplay, but that wouldn't be realized in a role-playing space until we trundle towards 1980 with Avatar, which is conceivably the first MMORPG ever made. That's a big jump, fuck me, I just sat down, what do I do here? I just draw the whole timeline? Obviously, a big deal at the time, Avatar saw players having the ability to interact with one another. Built-in chat features meant that you could trade trade and coordinate dungeon delves, party structure, all that good stuff. Then we get a few more of this and that of that era, including Dungeon of Death, instant software. Look at that, that's some instant software. There's nothing to discuss about this. Hey, what's this temple? Oh, well, that's just the Temple of Apshai, one of the first dungeon crawlers ever produced. Make your way through enough rooms and grab the powerful 4-pixel artifacts and use them to kill monsters. This is actually the first game to also have room descriptions and weight that cause encumbrance. Those are definitely ideas. Then, on the back of that, Dungeon Quest was conceived and would go on to be one of the first RPG series ever. These games are novel in that they are real-time, so after 45 minutes had been spent, you get the big loss, go back to DOS. Just kidding, DOS isn't out yet. Wasted my joke too early. And in 1979, Space 1 and 2 released, marking a brand new territory for plot, a completely different setting. This is the first time a developer moved us out of the dungeon and into a new location, although the space idea was probably stolen in part from pen and paper RPG Traveler, but I'm a video man, not a table man, I wouldn't know for sure. But regardless, this really would become the two big camps, the space people and the sword people. Both will return forever from this point. We romp on to 1980 with Odyssey, the complete app-venture, a game which featured maps, differing locations, and finally put us in a real sprawling world. Seas, mountains, trees, and shit. It was a big deal for 1980, you gotta give it props. I mean, why are you downplaying this? How about you get some humility drivers for that 3090 Ti of yours? But can its randomly large impact hold a candle to all-time legendary game Quest 1? Yes, Quest 1 is not very interesting, but anyway, moving on. Rogue, the game that would birth the roguelike, is worth a mention. Here we see a usage of randomly generated environments, with randomness being used as much as humanly possible. Also, death in Rogue meant restarting the entire adventure, a concept that is certainly not abused today to make games seem more fun. Nope. And then there's a small development, it probably doesn't matter. Psych! Matters more than sliced bread. Ultima is created. Alongside this, following right after, was Wizardry, both games spiraling into long-standing series, and the reason that they were such big hits is because they took the metaphorical chicken and added a little metaphorical salt to it. First on the docket, Ultima, created by Richard Garriott, would serve as the first open-world RPG. Huge by the standards of the time, the overworld being considerably large with explorable dungeons littered throughout. The top-down perspective was familiar, but Ultima took it major league. The landscape was getting colorful with shapes being more defined, and this marked the first genuine usage of tile-based graphics, a staple of what was soon to come. Plot would be central to the gameplay in Ultima, but hardly stood as revolutionary, but the usage of accessory characters was novel, something which goes to mammoth heights in following years. Shops were introduced as a means to upgrade equipment, buy food, and obtain new spells. So that's fucking massive. But as previously noted, it wasn't the only defining RPG that year. Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, would be the first game in a Dungeons & Dragons style to utilize color. Parties were also for the first time defined and utilized from the beginning to the end, with the player in control of multiple characters. And finally, the player had the choice of determining alignment, something not yet implemented from D&D and would be later utilized to interesting effect in other games. By the way, fun fact, this is the first game with placed encounters, so now we're all ready for bosses to be standing in the same predefined spot, waiting to get the large lance in the ass and all that. Wizardry was massive, almost as big as my meaty member, and an absolute titan in the industry. I want to pit stop right here with Dragon Stomper, yeah, stomp those fucking dragons, don't let them eat you, that's the whole title, a 1982 game for the Atari 2600, which stands as the earliest console RPG. This is a large distinction, ignore the fact that the game is garbage, actually I haven't played it personally, disregard might be good, but if nothing else, this is the beginning of the split between computer and console. The years would go by with games attempting to capitalize or to reinvent, and besides a few improvements in graphics and sounds, no one had the idea to make things more action-oriented until Dragon Slayer, the first action RPG. The fusion between numbers and the growthage of said numbers and arcadey action-esque games was obviously an interesting idea, and it was so interesting that it became 90% of all RPG designs in the modern day. Following soon after this, a game that has no true fanfare, Expedition Amazon, in general a game that's small in scope, limited in interest, and actually tried something that no one else had really attempted yet. The game has a contemporary setting, choosing the real world and the current day as the backdrop. Finally, we have the trinity of medieval, space, and now regular world. More to come on regular-ass world. I've got a stick, a vaguely not RPG in here, called Forbidden Forest, Yu-Gi-Oh! Card-ass sound and title, as it was the first game to feature a day-night cycle. Now, be gone, Forbidden Forest, thanks for the update. Quickly, we're gonna stop at Nobunaga's Ambition, an exceptionally early strategy RPG which featured multiple endings. Do I have to say more about this particular product? Well, I could, but I shan't. Good game, big game, thanks game. Loved by all, no doubt, forever and ever, game Hide Lied release releases, which is a moment of pure okay for gamers today. Exciting in its time as being an early ARPG, there was a lot of hype surrounding it, but little change for the genre as a whole. The biggest contribution was regeneration mechanics, which somehow, someway, lays the groundwork for future concepts related to time and the passage of said time. Shadowkeep, one of the most prominent, colorful first-person RPGs released in 1984, was also the first game to receive a novelization, making the story and characters more fleshed out. And then 1985 rolls up to the club and throws us a little feature called auto mapping, found in SSI's Fantasy. This will be used by others, many others. Stop stealing our concept. Oops, we're a defunct company in 1994. Fuck. By the end of the mid-1980s, we had advanced far beyond levels such as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It was more like hyper D&D in here, and looking at our sheet, we've filled out quite a bit more. We've got all sorts of graphical improvements, our story potential has grown, dynamic gameplay has become stronger, and the keyword section is becoming fleshed out. The beginning of this genre about hitting others with sticks, swords, and stones and spells was humble during the early years, with most consumers thinking, this is fun, sure I'll play this. With only a few exceptions, the computer role-playing game was just happily existing as something for people who didn't feel like playing games with their friends. You couldn't say that the genre was making enormous waves, it was just successful enough. But all this talk about hitting people with sticks and numbers, whatever, caught the attention of the Japanese, with many developers being enamored with the potential. Let's reverse course for a second, back to 1982 with The Dragon and the Princess, which marked the Japanese entry into the role-playing game. And in any event, it was a good product. The game is considered a precursor to the tactical RPG where you would attend to battles from overhead, dictating where units go and what they engage with. This idea becomes fully fleshed out with Bokosuka Wars in 1983, where you actually assume the role of many units instead of the small encounters found in The Dragon and the Princess. Steadily, games would originate from Japan instead of the West, with attempts such as Deadly Towers, Ganso Saiji, Super Monkey Daiboken, or Sung Wukong, Super Monkey Big Adventure Wii. For a few years, games like Hide Lie, Dragon Slayer, and classic Japanese RPG Rambo were exposing the Japanese to a genre they love. The Tower of Draga was incredibly popular, absolutely propelling interest despite not explicitly advancing any system seen before. If anything, it was a sincere proof of concept, paving the way for its own series of games and some underground shit like Ys and The Legend of Zelda. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, another Japanese product which was more of a strategy game than a role-playing game, would introduce people to being focused on the big picture instead of the micro-interactions that gamers were accustomed to. This style would help reveal a new subgenre, the strategy RPG. For all your chess-like desires, assume the role of a general that's flying and pinpoint targets to attack. Then Dragon Quest, a full-on turn-based RPG inspired directly from Ultima and Wizardry, was created. This game put a wrench in the non-wrench holding device, so to speak. All of a sudden, Japanese gamers were enamored with two major improvements to the genre. Firstly, a stronger focus on narrative, with Shigeru Miyamoto claiming that Dragon Quest directly impacted how developers considered scenario writing. And if Shigeru Miyamoto says something was influential to the genre, you know it's a pretty big deal. Secondly, music was finally seen as something that could really sell a game. Until now, music was something between non-existent and balls. You'd be lucky to have the goblins make noise that sounded like a fucking kazoo, let alone even one song. So now you've got a full OST, and boy oh boy, this becomes very important. Regardless of even this, however, I'm pretty positive Dragon Quest is the first RPG with an actual technical side quest. The princess is locked away in some dank-ass pit and you've got to save her. Got is in quotes here because you can beat the game without doing that for some reason. Apparently she can ride in there, doesn't matter, King doesn't even seem bothered. If you didn't know, side quests become this omnipresent concept that you can't make an RPG without anymore. They're not necessary to complete, they're usually tedious, not well thought out, and either pointless or not overly impactful. But if they don't exist, your game sucks ass, thanks for playing. All this to say that Dragon Quest kicks off what most people consider the subgenre of the JRPG, which bursts, I don't know, let's just say some of the best games that have ever existed. Because it's not only about the great products that come as a result of Dragon Quest, but also the legendary series that come as a result of those influenced products. It's like a butterfly moment for a huge portion of the genre. And then a period of sequels and new releases for everyone. New Ultimas, new Wizardries, the sequel to Bard's Tale. Sorry for not mentioning Bard's Tale by name. Decent game. Zork and stuff. It was crazy. Everyone was going bananas. Look how many bananas are going on here. But really the next point of evolution wouldn't occur until 1986 again. It was literally like 4 months after Dragon Quest, but anyway, Wizardry 4, The Return of Werdna. Now you might think, well, that's odd, why not the second or third games? Why Wizardry 4? Well, as far as I know, this is one of the only RPGs ever made where you can't gain experience. You assume the role of the antagonist and it's hard as fuck. This is potentially, to this day, the hardest RPG ever produced. It's so incredibly hard that even in 1986, where gaming was made to be as ball-busting as possible, lest you finish a $60 product in an hour, this game was considered to be for masters of wizardry. No one likes this game. I mean, I'm sure someone likes it. I tried it. It's too hard to even navigate out of the first room, but on the list of people who liked it, I'm not on it. But regardless of any of that, the game is definitely a new take on standard affairs, and I think it's definitely pretty novel even after 35 more years have passed. But you know what's popular? Pokemon. We're going right to 1997. Just kidding. Fucking around. But you know what actually kicked off the idea of recruiting enemy monsters as allies? A little game called Megami Tensei, which went on to spawn about 500 games, but here in the quaint year of 1987, we just have the original, a game wholly inspired by wizardry, but now you can use a laptop computer to talk to and enslave demons. Which is pretty messed up. Where's your respect for the demon's rights? You're gonna take Cerberus from his home and make him fight for you? Fucking hell. Now everyone copies this idea moving forward, so now monsters in the old party becomes a hip new thing. Funnily enough, Megami Tensei also added an auto battle feature where the game would progress through an encounter without your input. Here's what I'd like to call that idea. Cool. And it's only been about 10 seconds. We have to mention Dragon Quest again, with Dragon Quest II released in '87, as this would be the first game to allow party members to join later into the quest as opposed to having everyone from the beginning. Back to the United States shortly after with their next big attempt at making money with Dungeon Master, which did 4 things surprisingly. Firstly, it made money. Secondly, it introduced the concept of active time battle, where the player and the computer would be plotting their attacks simultaneously. This active style of combat goes on to be used heavily in the future. Third, sound effects were used for more than just or like trees and shit rustling. And finally, this is the actual first game to use the paper doll style of inventory management. If you don't know what that is, I didn't know it was called this. It ain't that popular. I know you've seen this shit before, and it began here in 1987 with a game that's frankly almost never discussed. So good work there, NA Atari ST developers. You've made an evolutionary product. But wait, what's this? It's the Japanese at the door again, and they've brought out Final Fantasy. I'm sure that isn't a big deal. It was a big deal. Now, it's funny because Final Fantasy I really only invented one large novelty for the genre, and that's taking the perspective from this to a little bit of this action. Other than that, it's a little routine, but it's done extremely well. It has interesting class distribution, a lot of equipment, spells, a really expansive world, fully utilized story, and some of the most famous music from an RPG. Also, new to the genre would be the addition of a flying machine, which I don't think was done to this point. If I'm wrong, sucks I guess, but I'm pretty sure that's the truth. And most importantly, Final Fantasy was a popularizing game, and without it, I'm not sure many of the best games ever made would have been conceived. Especially all those Final Fantasy games after this one. Alongside this, Faxinandu was released, being the first side-scrolling RPG ever made. Another fucking perspective is born. You'd be surprised how long it takes before I'm pretty sure every conceivable angle of game is created here. Except 4D, and I bet we see that before we die. Someone will perfect the 4D game. But anyway, yeah, Faxinandu is a side-scroller. Cool, that's something novel. Nice, thanks. We gotta move on. It's actually like a few football fields worth of more dialogue I have to get through. Want to mention this game, Dragon Slayer 4. Yes, the series is still going and well-loved. No, you wouldn't know that because it's hardly talked about in English, is a game that fused elements of open world and non-linear gameplay. This creates an early type of Metroidvania, essentially a new subgenre of a game where you look around for stuff, get equipment, use stuff to get new stuff, and wander around being lost. Final Fantasy II comes in to say hello. Everyone tries to shun it because game bad, but it has to show us this system of stat progression where your actions impact your growth. This will be done better later. It be done bad at this day, though. Oh yeah, I guess this game might be the first one with character portraits. I actually don't know. I'll just say so without any evidence. Up next is Phantasy Star, made because Sega, as always, thought someone else was taking all the good ideas, and fortunately, as in typical Sega fashion, they did some unique stuff, and this game is constantly talked about as a landmark title. Not only does it feature a female protagonist, it also had the first set of named and plot-relevant characters that were predefined in all ways. From their abilities to what they can whack enemies with, Phantasy Star was potentially the first game that looked more like a play than a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. You were playing a movie, possibly for the first time. Also, we're in this fusion scenario of sci-fi fantasy, which is like, instead of future technology that you hit people with, you're hitting aliens with a claymore. All around, well done. Thanks for starting another series I have to painstakingly animate in. Ys 1 releases, and I'm only mentioning this because it creates a 30-year-long series that features the exact same main character for the entire run of games, and no one cares, and that baffles me. Irrationally mad about this. You know, it's funny, I'm bringing up the sheet again, but now we're loaded with all sorts of innovations, named characters, 16-bit graphics, more diverse story locations and ideas, sideways, upways, but there will be more ways to look at things coming soon. But I reckon we bump up these numbers a little, scroll past these things to make the video look more formal. Yeah, there we go, I know what I'm doing. But we've got to move on. I need to continue rambling about games and asses and balls and stuff. Also, decent time to mention that Zelda, while a role-assuming game, a rag, has had a long history of making dumb fucks such as yours truly argue whether or not it's an actual RPG or what it entails, and I'm of the camp that Zelda is an adventure game predominantly, as they don't feature experience points of any kind, and for that reason I'm only going to discuss Zelda 2 in this long long football field diagram. Zelda 2 is a game. Thank you for coming. Okay, fine. The game is a side-scrolling RPG that has more in-depth combat than some of the other ones released in that genre. There's some puzzle solving, but I'm not able to, in good confidence, say this game did anything really new. It is a good game, though. Sentinel World 1 over here, Let's Come This Way, was published by EA and was notable for a unique music score that incorporated, using air quotes here, incorporated multiple instruments. The way this was done was pretty interesting, with the game swapping between them faster than the human ear could differentiate. So instead of a bunch of pans and shit banging together, they were able to trick our feeble 8 minds with just a single audio channel. At the same time, Might and Magic receives its first sequel with the innovation of character aging and dying being made. Is this worth a note in a video that is football field sized? Yeah, of course, it's M&M. I love that candy. Oh, and this game had the class-specific side quest and class-restricted area idea, so that's 2 strikes for the price of 1. Star Cruiser cruises in with the rendered 3D polygons, an actual big deal, and I'm not being sarcastic. I can't believe this was the case in 1988. But a big event is drawing my attention away because, like the sudden impact of an atom bomb, we have a new atom bomb themed genre, the post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland. With Wasteland, a progenitor to the Fallout series, with a world ravaged by atomic warfare, was a setting not yet seen in this space. Also, it's the first game where events you partake in affect the world, with changes being permanent. Oh, sorry, I'm just coming down with a little Draken as it's now 1989 and I have to brave the realms of 3D, except we're full of shit. It's pseudo 3D, still looks nice, cut me some slack. Graphics were becoming more and more interesting as the years went by, and it was something everyone wanted first, to be the pioneer. So for all the shortcomings of Draken, mostly all of the gameplay, the directions it tried to go were worthy of praise. You know a word I like? Mother, because it partners so good with Mothership, the apparently full working title of Nintendo's RPG Mother, which featured a modern setting, being the first game to attempt to put players into 1989. It wasn't only novel, but it was well done. Playing with concepts of satire and parody made the game stand out, and went to not only spawn its respective series, of course, but also make everyone start thinking about 1990X, and 20X, and 2017X. Final game for the 1980s, and it's Final Fantasy Legend, a game that has nothing to do with Final Fantasy. It's a bad title. Instead, this marks the beginning of the Saga series of games. This is also noteworthy for being the first handheld RPG ever. Non-linear, action-dependent growth, and a name that wasn't the actual game's name, Final Fantasy Legend was popular for being goodular. Alright, we've been stuck in the mud of the 1980s for so long. If this visual representation isn't enough to demonstrate that there's 140 of the same type of game coming out, I can tell you there's a lot of the same type of game coming out here. So let's move on to brighter pastures. The 1990s, home to the aha and the yep. Only a short time ago, we had this little man representing the player, and now look, we have this slightly better looking man. Times really change, but speaking genuinely, look at this avalanche of stuff here now. We're filling out quite nicely with innovations, derivations, additions, so many ins you won't notice the bulge in my pants. By this time, series were becoming more common. You'd see the 90s begin with some more Bard's Tales, Atlas continuing their Mega 10 series, and Dragon Quest IV. We will take a brief pit stop here to discuss a new formula for the console RPG, the non-linear story. In DQ4, the player assumes the role of many different characters in their own independent story, a new change to narrative structure. Fucking hell, there's too much going on. Look at all these PNGs. Oh, damn it, I also have to mention that Dragon Quest IV has AI-controlled party members with tactics being established, so I'm just rubbing my balls real quick. Many games will implement this feature. I'm not sure anyone has ever really loved it. Final Fantasy III releases soon after and pioneers 2 things. Firstly, floating damage numbers were conceived. Cool, strike up a UI change. We also have an introduction to the job system where you can freely swap classes for your characters on the fly. Oh, by the way, there's this game series called Fire Emblem. It's pretty underground, no one's ever heard of it, and it begins right here. This is a BFD, or a big fucking deal, as it popularized the idea of the tactical role-playing subgenre, as well as, you know, spawning a lineage of sequels. But wait, we've had the TRPG here for a while. Well, now this is the first one where you level up a lot, and your characters are independent, and it changes. But the PC side of things feels the need to strike back. The consoles are taking over. What can I whip up here? How about Fountain of Dreams, the spiritual successor to Wasteland? This is a BD game, or a big deal. Panned by many, shunned by some, the general consensus, this game is dumb. Alright, but seriously, how about Quest for Glory? So you want to be a hero? You want to be a good game? This is considered an innovative good game. I love seeing someone say that, makes my job easier. Being the first adventure RPG hybrid. Puzzle solving, battling, character planning, fully interactive with commands that allow you to experience the world through your character. Good work, Soonish to Die Company. Cosmic fantasy, giving us a little anime in our games, something not used later. Surely, no anime has ever been seen in RPGs before. And I'm gonna mention to this game's credit that it used voice acting, something seen by now, but I can't find a definitive first usage. A game I can't even locate anything about called Moonchild had voice acting in 1986 apparently, but since I can't even confirm what it is, I'm gonna stick voice acting here. And then we got Jajamaru Genki Maden Mobarushi no Kinmanju fucking, and it didn't do much of anything for anyone. In his review, Kirk Kalata claimed that the puzzles were simplistic, the enemies didn't drop enough money, and the music was grating. So what did you not like about the game? Then we have the Keys to Maramon, which introduces the idea of picking a starting point as your character can be one of various choices. The reviews weren't overly stellar, as Kirk Lesser gave the game 3 out of 5 stars. Kirk Major gave the game a 5 out of 5 rating, claiming fuck Kirk Lesser. Oh, it's Last Armageddon. This game sees the introduction of World War IV in anything really, as demons are warring against robots for control of the Earth. Yet another game where I'm canonically dead. Also, Wikipedia labels Hitler as a theme, so I guess they beat you to that one, Wolfenstein, if that's a theme now. Armageddon! Wizardry has been going on in the background a little bit, but here we are with Wizardry 6, which innovates mouse control, battles, stats, you name it. It's an amazing juxtaposition to show where we started and where we've gotten to in this line of games. I'm not stopping here for long, but this review of Axe Battler, A Legend of Golden Axe is worth sharing. Considered a Zelda 2-esque game, Mean Machines compared playing Axe Battler to jumping off a cliff. Please bring this brutality back to game journalism. Cross Swords would mark a return to the arcades with a beat-em-up cooperative RPG, the first of its ilk. But you gotta admit, even despite this unbelievable video, the best you've ever seen is becoming a blur. There's too much dragons and dungeons, quests and warriors. We want to get back to fantasy, that's right. Final Fantasy IV, the ever-evolving series, introduces the active time battle system. Something Square would dip their entire metaphorical toes into. The system was turn-based with a real-time flair. It made you have to stop stopping and thinking and start starting and thinking. Enjoy my upcoming video writing like a 1 years old. Also, apparently this game was the first good example of a dramatized story according to this text I'm reading, so fine, we'll give a minor evolution to story and plot with drama. I don't know if I agree with this. I just read it. I'll put it here. But drama. It's been made. Hear that, Bill? You've lost. Next game on the chopping block, Final Fantasy Adventure. But don't worry, it's the actual first game in the Mana series, Seiken Densetsu. We have 2 big changes. The power gauge. Fill the power gauge and fuck your enemies up. But if you don't fill the power gauge, whoa! You're a bad player. You made a mistake. And now we can kill townsfolk. But after 5,000 words, and I'm feeling a little parched, I'm getting exhausted, we've gone through so many games, it's beginning to all feel so similar. And with good reason, because it seems like all the good ideas have been taken. So many RPGs copied formulas, combined concepts, removed this or that, and very few added something I can bold and put in red. So let's speed through until something new occurs. 1992, we have Darklands. We're in the Holy Roman Empire. There's religion. What's going on? Wow, game didn't sell well. 1992, we have Dragon Quest V. We're not in the Holy Roman Empire. There's collectibles and achievements, casino gambling, and playable pregnant characters. New concepts break out the red and the bolding. 1992, we have Evo, The Search for Eden. We're in the prehistoric times. Dinosaurs are playable. First RPG to have playable dinosaurs. I mean, it's kind of cool. Don't shun that. Game's rare as dick. Now, Lunar is interesting because it's the first RPG with really defined cutscenes. Hand-drawn animation and voice acting bring the scenes to life, and made good use of the Sega CD for like the first time ever. Otherwise, standard fare of combat, save for mobility in a turn-based setting. It's still fairly rare, but it's interesting that it can be found as far back as Lunar. Fire Emblem Gaiden has difficulties as far as I could see the first time an RPG offered such a thing. Wizardry 7? Okay, really? Wizardry 7 already? Remember when sequels took around 2 seconds to produce as opposed to the 20 years we're seeing now? Anyway, Wizardry, always on top of things, makes a system called Diplomacy, which is a good stepping stone towards faction management, something popular in MMOs and simulations. Also, the NPCs, if they think you're taking too long because you suck, will go and take the items from you, making them impossible to obtain. I think that's cool. It's a get good of 1992. Hey, you want to hear a secret? It's Secret of Mana. I never claimed to be a good writer. Suck my balls. Secret of Mana is obviously a pretty popular game. People love to chat about it. They love to steal its dubbed ring command menu system. And when you start thinking about it, this has been used a lot, like in 9 different games. Ring command menu system now online. Additionally, cooperative multiplayer was fleshed out, pioneering more about other game genres, but you sometimes see dual action RPGs with you and your little fucking friend over there. Sorry for all the vitriol. Your dumb friend has got me all mad. So mad that I have to run on to good old Shadowrun, the first considered film noir style video game. It's not really the first Blade Runner-esque RPG, so we can't give it those points, but film noir, okay, I see you, Game Informer. Hey, it's a familiar face again, Ys 4, starting a weird, hardly used meta system where one game is actually two. Versions with differences were made, basically predating the whole Pokemon structure. The games themselves don't invent anything new, so they're getting put in this garbage can. Final game of 1993 was Syndicate, a cyberpunk-y, dystopian-y romp with an isometric perspective, being the first game to do that exclusively. There's only so many ways I can think of showing stuff to people. So I question why and how we are still getting updates on this kind of thing, but hey, it's only 1993. We've got forever left. Idea No He is the first game to have non-random encounters, but only in dungeons. This game also lets you put underwear on your head and make people think you're a pervert. It's also badly translated as Idea Day. Oh hey, what's that? Oh, it's Mother 2 Earthbound, the least popular good game ever made. Seriously, it goes without saying there was no love in North America for Earthbound when it launched, despite massive Japanese success. This setting retained the Americana setting from the first Mother, and in general wasn't revolutionary in massive ways besides being responsible for birthing 60% of indie games. The most definable change in Earthbound is how the game calculates and applies damage. This rolling HP bar made it so you can respond to mortal damage with healing and gave the game, while turn-based, more of an active approach. Also, this might be the first first-person RPG with visible spells. Oh god, wait a minute, it's the Elder Scrolls, quick, under the desk, the world map is coming for us. Yeah, the Elder Scrolls Arena is a big game, quite literally and quite metaphorically and quite definitely. The map and world were given massive importance, being just a step beyond. As the day-night cycle finally is utilized in interesting ways with shops and NPCs closing in the evening, the player had to begin thinking about time differently. Also, the first-person perspective with scrolling uninterrupted graphics would be remarkably important moving forward, despite not being the first video game overall to do so. Let's just take in the scenery of Eye of the Beholder real quick, nothing to talk about, just a really good game, didn't change or add much, and bam, let's look at Final Fantasy VI, and unfortunately, for being one of the best RPGs ever made, it didn't add much to the genre. You can maybe give it the credit of an ensemble cast of characters, or perhaps that it would go on to be the graphical basis for the 16-bit style in the future, and I suppose it was the first RPG to have complicated strings of inputs in order to create some unique effect in battle, a test of skill that would be seen more later. And for a far, far less good game, Robotrek, we'd see the player character not being a combatant. Instead, you'd be using robots with various developed skills. It's like Pokemon, but not liked by most people. And as we continue rolling towards the modern day, perhaps the fitting culmination of 20 years of RPG design is Chrono Trigger, one of the most revered games ever created. Beautiful sprite work, seen it. An amazing soundtrack, yesterday's news, multiple endings, done before, try again. Combination attack and New Game Plus. There we go, that's new. You finally got something. Chrono Trigger is a big game, both literally and more literally. It has so much content that you can't help but marvel at the daringness of the developers to try something so ambitious with tons of story elements, character plots, and innovation to combat systems. The team attack really shines here, and it's one of those things that every developer will try to make use of in the future. And while Chrono Trigger named New Game Plus the term that has stood the test of time, it's hardly the first time this kind of thing was seen, and in fact, it was done better in earlier titles. But for the nameage of a system alone, it gets my nod. It's also Chrono Trigger. I'm not going to just ignore it. I need something to use for the thumbnail. And at this point, you might be noticing the thinning of games to discuss. Truly, there's about 1 million titles dropping everywhere, and most of them aren't pushing the boundaries like they did in the early years. But much like a good plot structure, we're reaching the climax of the early generations, and soon after, there's going to be an explosion of ideas changing the very grounds these pixelated fucks walk on. The worlds will grow, they'll change the scale, and I need a break, because have you seen all these PNGs? Tune in next time. We'll hit up the mid-90s to the mid-current day with the rise of the 3D era and the rising of my pants.